Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we discuss my thoughts on episode 13 of the anime series Megalo Box. For all intents and purposes, the series finale, and this was a hell of a way to go. At least as far as I'm concerned. The entire episode being one lengthy, protracted, matchup between Yuri and Joe. Going 13 full rounds, which is like absurd. Both of these men being left to their own devices, and for, all the way up until the post credits, it's not anything to do with, who is going to win this bout. It's much more an answer to a level of soul searching, of trying to find oneself, trying to find your place in the world, trying to find somewhere to fit in, somewhere that you can be accepted for who and what you are. And that's largely on Yuri's shoulders throughout the course of the episode, because by the end, he's welcomed by Team Nowhere, there was such a satisfying element to that. Like, I didn't know going in how this was going to play out. And as I've talked about, because the word death is always in the interstitial titles and everything, I was fearful that one of these two guys was going to kick the bucket by the end. I didn't know if it was going to be Joe or Yuri, And then there is that point where we see one of them is being like ambulanced away on a gurney or something like that. They don't show who it is. But by and large, you get sort of an inference. You can make an inference that it was probably Yuri, because they intercut that back and forth with Yukiko, the Lady Shirato, and her silent sort of praying to herself as she sheds tears after trying to push forth this military deal, which it's exactly what I supposed it to be, although she doesn't harbor any resolve that the gear should be weaponized, even though she, as the army guy points out, you've basically been trying to sell this to us as though it were an enhancement that weaponizes soldiers, and they're kind of taking her to task in their little meeting we keep cutting back and forth between, which where they're saying, can weapons be added to it? Can we make it even stronger, more fierce than just what is on paper, than just what you've sold us and you've showcased to us in the fights with Yuri and everything like that, whilst still wearing the gear? And she still has some moral resolve. I mean, she's still checking up on Yuri, we find out, even after all of this, is said and done. It's a year later. We skip ahead to a year later, after the protracted battle is all said and done. And we see that Yuri has been, accepted by them, welcomed in by them. He's found a home for himself amongst these people who were adversaries to him once upon a time, that mutual respect, that aspect of sort of being accepted by family who at one time, it's the last consideration he probably ever would have made. These people from the wrong side of the tracks, from destitution and everything like that. I'm going to not only commingle with them, but I'm one of them now, like he had nowhere else to go, and yet they welcomed him. And it was, just satisfying along those lines, that character, interplay, that gravitas of plotting, the idea that here were these two men, they found themselves in the ring because they were up against each other, and it was the most satisfying, self-ingratiating thing they've ever experienced in their lives. Everything that they had worked for built to this, and it was the utmost, most satisfying thing they ever experienced. Even for Yuri, who took the loss, we find out in the end. And that would have been my one holdover gripe, that even though it wasn't about who won and who lost, I still wanted to know. I still desperately wanted to know. I said to myself, as they're closing in on that last shot of Joe's forged ID with the little flower taped to it, I'm like, if we don't find out who won, though, like even though you can make the inference, even though it was implied that it was probably Joe who won, they staved it off. They did it pretty cunningly, where like they didn't show Yuri or Joe for a while, And I'm wondering, and I'm wondering, and I'm wondering, and finally they show them both. And I thought Joe was like, on his way out of town or something like that. I didn't think he was coming back. And that kind of was a little bit depressing. But then they're all together. They're all together. Seeing, Pops, Nanbu rise to that challenge once again, that aspect of the previous episode that I loved so much, that even in the absence of his other eye, is he able to listen and still see what's going on in the ring through, his imagination, applying the sounds he's hearing and knowing how both of these fighters, having observed both of these fighters, what they're capable of, and being able to sort of just see it in his mind, what's going on. Again, tapping into the talents that he was capable of all along and only now has just fulfilled for himself and attained for himself. And so, like, the two probably most standout arcs in this series has got to be Pops's and Yuri's to a point. Joe is kind of like, somebody had been talking to me about the fact that, like, Joe is an interesting character to a point, but, like, he's just kind of there, and whereas the more compelling story is revolving around, like, Pops and everything else that's going on with, Yuri and whatever like that. And even Aragaki to a point. All of these characters around Joe seem to have had a more resounding character arc or character interplay or dynamic or whatever. And in a sense, Joe is just kind of the center point that, we focus on. It's the focal point, but it's everything going on around him that his involvement in is what instigates the change, is what instigates that evolution in the lives of all of these other characters. He is the most integral piece because without him, none of these other characters have that experience, have that level of growth happen for themselves. And, without Joe, Yuri doesn't find himself. Without Yuri, Joe doesn't find himself, I mean, it seems to me, even though he is sort of, shadow boxing in that final scene overlooking, the ocean, and we see the scorpion up on the hill, great sort of visual cue to this whole adventure from the very beginning. And Joe's saying to himself, yeah, I still got it. I could still dance in the ring if I wanted to. But at that point, it's been a year. And the implication is that, he's no longer interested in it. He's accomplished what he set out to accomplish. And that was enough for him. He knew well enough when enough was enough. And there's no getting anything satisfying out of it again. There's nothing that could be comparable to the satisfaction he had already attained in that 13 rounds against Yuri. And again, that's a level of him finding himself, of finally appealing to that internal desire, finally answering to that. And I mean, of course it's still an open door to a point if they ever want to make a season 2. A la Rocky, something could tug at Joe's heartstrings and compel him back into the ring, potentially. But it's absolutely unnecessary, as far as I'm concerned, with where we leave this. The entirety of the series, everyone who has come up against Joe has grown and evolved and been able to find themselves. Or the people who has stood side by side with him, Sachio and Pops. Even, as I say, in the last couple of episodes, calling back on Aragaki, his coming back and getting back involved with Joe and being supportive of Joe, who at once, he wanted to take Joe's head off, and to see Yuri in that placement by the end. Just all of the character drama. The character drama has always been more important than the sport more important than the winners or the losers. And while I can see some people being like, well, this was kind of an underwhelming way to go out, you know, through my own sort of empathetic mindset, my own sort of aspiring writer mindset as far as the plotting goes and things like that, I can't help but see all of the glory in how the story shakes down in the end, what its purpose was. The sport was just a means to an end of developing these characters. And that is what I take away from this experience, watching this. But even with that said, as I did say in this video, it is on record, that I did want to know officially who won. I wanted to hear the official ruling as to who took the win. And of course, much as I had inferred and expected, it was Joe. But I'm oh so glad that none of these characters had to die for it. And what more can I really say? You know, that's it in a nutshell. This was a hell of a series. I loved the animation style from the get-go, the very classic animation style. I've been listening to the soundtrack, and it's just all kinds of awesome. It's lit. And this was a lit series, as far as I'm concerned. One of my favorites of the spring 2018 season. And so, yeah, with that in mind, that'll be it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.